Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Welcome to the Lost Voice Radio, where we seek to recover the voice of common sense through classical philosophy and theology and apply it to the troubles of our modern world. I'm John Studi, along with my co-host Jacob Nelson, and we're here to talk to you today about social media. And right now there's something really hot in the news where somebody actually committed a murder on Facebook Live. You know, me being somebody who is absolutely disconnected from the world because I live under a rock, I haven't heard too much about this. I saw it in my own Facebook feed as a news item, but I haven't looked into it myself. But Jake, it looks like you've already done some research and thought on this. What's going on?
Yeah, I've been following this a little bit over the last couple days. A man named Steve Stevenson, which, I don't know, if your first name matches your last name, I don't know. Like, we have a son coming, I don't want him named like Nels Nelson, but, you know, not to rip on the guy's name. But Steve Stevenson, he was driving his car and picked out the 73-year-old man in Ohio, I believe it was, and shouted out a woman's name, and the 73-year-old had no idea what he was talking about, and Steve Stevenson yelled out, "You're going to die because of this woman," and then shot him.
What woman?
Just whatever woman's name he yelled out.
Oh, okay,
yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, and so he shot and killed this 73-year-old man on Facebook Live, and he talked about how he was going to basically commit mass murder on Facebook Live, go on a killing spree, and live record it through social media, which I think is obviously insane.
Yes. Because,
A, you're doing something insane by murdering people indiscriminately, but it's also, I think, even more insane because you're just giving police the evidence.
Right, and it's more than just evidence. It amounts to an admission of guilt and demonstration of it.
Right. And also, I was reading one commentator on basically his disposition would most likely relieve him from any ability to claim insanity. So even if he wanted to claim insanity, get out of something like perhaps a death penalty, which we actually talked about last week,
sure,
his disposition may preclude him from that. Now, obviously, we're not lawyers at all. We're not even doctors yet. Hopefully, we will be one day, doctors of theology and philosophy, but that remains to be seen. But we're not lawyers, so I can't talk about that. But anyway, it's a developing story. We still don't know where this guy is. The police last sent out notice that 4 states should be notified that he could be in the area, and I believe there are New York, Pennsylvania, Indiana, and I don't remember the other one offhand.
Okay.
But kind of 4 nearby states to Ohio.
And do you happen to have a description of the man?
I don't offhand.
We'll look it up, and I think it'd be good to talk about that, just in case any of our listeners are in those areas.
True. Yeah, a lot of our listeners are probably out east, so I'll look that up in a minute. I have the computer in front of me. But anyway, we've been planning to talk about Mirifica now for about 4 weeks, and perhaps our topic schedule has been providentially blessed in order to talk about it now with such a heinous crime going on.
Right.
And it really brings to the fore whether or not social media is good or evil. Of course, we've talked about how objects in themselves are not evil or good, or how they're used, and this is no different. Same with most any other technology. But it really highlights the necessity of virtue in our modern world. It necessitates us being able to discriminate, deliberate about good and evil, and not just about what other people are doing, but about our own actions, and about our own use of social media. I mean, anybody out there listening right now is partaking in social media, and one of the earliest forms of true social media in radio. Of course, we're not using radio waves, we're using the interwebs, but still, it's one of the earliest forms of social media, so we're all partaking in it. But it's how we're using it, too. It's the mindset that we enter into it. Now, if we're just going to listen to the radio and we're able-bodied, we have a job, we have a family, and we just decide we're going to listen to the radio 24/7 and not attend to anything else. Mm-hmm. Well, we're abusing social media. None of us out there listening are probably murderers. I should hope we don't have, well, maybe, if murderers are listening to our show, they'll have conversions, but,
It's like when I was growing up in the Protestant world, I had 3 Bibles stolen from me at church. And so I've always talked about, if they want that Bible so bad, maybe they'll read it and convert. And really start learning about the sins of theft and the real property rights that people have. Although it was always unfortunate, too, because I remember I had one in particular that had my name engraved on it and had all sorts of cool little commentaries, and it was leather, and it was my favorite color, and then I just left it at a seat in church, went to the bathroom, came back, and it was gone. And it wasn't a lost and found. The ushers didn't have it either, so...
Somebody just really needed it.
Once, yes.
I'm just looking up the description of the man.
Sure. Well, that's where you talked about social media being something that we really need to moderate, and I think one of the issues with social media, particular things, and in particular things like Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, is that it often will come with the veneer of genuine socialization, and so we get addicted to the immediate satisfaction of being in contact with our friends, but there's so much artificiality to it that it's not really serving the purpose of bringing us into contact with people in a way that is deep and meaningful. Not to say that there can't be deep and meaningful connections on Facebook, because I've actually had some of those connections and some of those conversations, but very often when you have 800 friends or more on Facebook and you hardly ever interact with them, or if you're going around on YouTube arguing on YouTube comment threads, then all you're doing is, in a way, arguing with the computer screen instead of interacting with somebody real. Because these real situations, these real interactions that we have that are in person, they require from us a greater amount of virtue because we don't have time to sit there and think and edit our posts if we need to, or edit our conversations. Right. And so there's a good use, I think, for social media, but there's an element of loss of reality that comes through communicating and socializing primarily through social networks online.
Just as a description, Steve Stevens, he's a 6'1" African-American man. He has a beard and mustache and is bald, driving a light-colored Ford Fusion the last time they had notice of him, and was last seen wearing a dark blue and gray or black striped polo shirt. It should probably go without saying that if you see him, just call the police. Don't approach him. Don't try and apprehend him. Don't, just keep...
Not be a hero.
Yeah.
You'll be the hero by calling the police.
Right. Don't put yourself in danger if you happen to see this guy. The manhunt has now gone national, so it could be anywhere, really. But, of course, keep a prudential distance and just call authorities if you happen to see this man. But going on, like this idea of social media and how really it's very isolating. Mm-hmm. I was talking in my class at the homeschool co-op last week about oftentimes the broader the media, the more isolating it actually is. And so the more people some medium can reach, the more it actually makes you isolated. And so you're talking about how a lot of social media has this hollow veneer, things like maybe Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever it might be, and you look at how wide that medium can reach, and not just in terms of numbers of people, but how widely it affects your life. I mean, people don't have photo albums even on their computers anymore. It's all Facebook. And once you upload a picture to Facebook, it's Facebook's property. Mm-hmm. And so the breadth of the medium is not just in terms of, there's 1 million subscribers or 1 trillion subscribers or whatever, but how deeply it's rooted into people's lives and how much it affects individuals. And so the wider a medium, the more isolated it actually makes people. And like you were saying, on things like Facebook or Twitter, I think a lot of times what happens is that people do sculpt their message. They sculpt their life according to what they want it to be, which means they're only putting the positive things out into the world to see. You don't see the negative of that person's life or the difficulties a lot of times. And so what happens then is the game of comparisons. John, if I see you on Facebook, boy, your life looks perfect, and now my life seems all the worse. And so there becomes this huge issue of envy and greed and all kinds of things that really corrupts the soul.
Right, I've even fallen into that a little bit too. I had a friend on Facebook who we went to high school together. She was a really nice girl and everything, so I've always appreciated her. But when I look at her Facebook profile, I get a little upset because I work my butt off, and I can barely eat from week to week. Okay, that's not entirely true, but either case, I'm not swimming in cash. But her life looks like a Dos Equis commercial. And I know that she's worked hard as well, but it seems to have, but this wealth and this prosperity has come very easily to her.
Yeah.
But every time I see her, she's always vacationing. She's always in some warm tropical climate with these just ridiculously good-looking people, all of them bleach blonde hair and these gigantic bright smiles, drinking margaritas at a poolside somewhere in Central America, which looks like just a fantastic life. But I have to keep in mind that she is human just like the rest of us.
Right.
And that she does have struggles. But she doesn't post those things on Facebook. And like you were saying, she only really posts the positive aspects of her life. And I think that it's really important for us to be mindful about what we do post. Beyond simply causing other people possibly to fall into envy or to put up a false front of perfection in your life, but there's also, I think, a danger in doing things like posting pictures of your children on Facebook. Because if you don't have the right privacy settings, and even sometimes if you do, there have been cases where people have taken the faces and identities of children and actually ruined their credit scores before they could even possibly do anything with it.
Yeah.
And so there's been a lot of issues with that as well. So my wife and I have both elected not to post any pictures of Michael. In addition to that, and this is something that I really had to think about a number of years ago, when you post things online, though, that becomes available for anybody to look at. And so if you're sitting there and you're putting on Facebook about how you went out drinking, or one thing that I said once was something about how PBR is cheap, but it does get you good and drunk. I removed that eventually. This was years and years ago. And it's not great either. I hate the taste of PBR. It's horrible.
Yeah, I'm not a PBR fan myself.
Yuck. If you can see through the beer, it's not real beer.
Yeah. By the way, did you see the pictures of Pope Benedict at his 90th birthday party on Easter Sunday?
I did not. Does he have a gigantic mug of beer?
He and his brother, George Ratzinger, who was also a cardinal, or archbishop, I forget if he's a cardinal or not, but they're in the Vatican Gardens drinking beers together. And Pope Benedict was wearing his white cassock, of course, and George was wearing a black cassock with the red and purple trim. It was perfect. I loved it.
See, that's one of the things I love about being Catholic. We get all the fancy stuff and all the good stuff. We get all the virtues with all of the fun parts too. Drinking is great.
Within moderation.
Within moderation. But Aquinas did say mild intoxication is the best state of mind. So.
Well, before you get into another Facebook post like PBR and why don't you continue with
continue. Anyway, continue with my thought. Let's drink some coffee. Make sure we got everything going here.
Absolutely.
But so you need to be really careful about the things that you post, even in terms of trying to find employment in your political worldview as well. I think that there's a particular danger.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was having a conversation with. I had posted something online about how I was afraid of applying towards a particular university or that I wouldn't get accepted because I knew that it was going to be a very liberal or leftist institution.
Yeah.
And I said something about that on Jimmy Aiken's wall, and he messaged me and said I removed it, and that he removed it not because he thought that it was inappropriate per se, but rather he was worried about me not getting the job because an employer didn't see it. And I'm like, well, that is true. I mean, yeah, there's that. And I wouldn't want to talk bad about the employer, but even the very fact of me posting things online that could be politically contrary to what a hiring manager believes.
Right, and I think that's the thing is, I think there's a particular prudence in the realm of education, which you and I both have a great love for education, want to be professors, that kind of thing. But within that realm, I think it's important to have some kind of political disinterestedness. Not so much that it's wrong to have political views, because it's not. Not that you want to go against your employer's views, which you have a right to. But when you're teaching, you want to be as transparent as possible and as adherent to the truth as possible. And if students get wind of any kind of political bent, regardless of if you're right or wrong, they may or may not write you off simply because of that political bent. So I think within education, there's kind of a special disclaimer for that. But, I mean, if you look in, even working in the church, shocking, I know, but it can be political.
Sure.
And if I'm actually not on social media other than on LinkedIn. Good luck finding Jacob Nelson on LinkedIn. There's like millions of us. But if you want to find me,
there's 3 of me in the world. I think one of them is a chiropractor in like California or something. So that's a different story. But
I'm not on social media. But if I were and I post some political things, even if they're not controversial, but just hey, I went to go vote for blank today. Even in a local election, not even a presidential one, that can very much be used against me if I'm looking for a job in the church. And that's not even a political institution. Well, it shouldn't be.
You're right. That's one of the reasons why I've set my privacy settings to as high as it could possibly go from what I gather anyway on Facebook, because I know that there's a certain number of students who have directly told me that if somebody had voted for Donald Trump or supported any of his policies almost whatsoever, that they would immediately write him off, write that person off.
Well, you're not admitting you voted for Donald Trump.
I'm not admitting anything along those lines. The only person I'll admit to voting for is Bob Swift for county commissioner.
Who's a local youth minister.
He's a local youth minister, and I just didn't have a horse in the race with the county commissioner. And I think Bob actually got 5 votes.
I voted for him, too.
Did you? Yeah, okay, that's hilarious. But that's the only person I admit to voting for on this previous election. But in either case, if somebody finds out that I have certain political positions, I'm written off. Or I've even noticed that among some of my students that once they become aware of the fact that I do not support gay marriage as something that should be the law of the land, nor do I support it as something that is morally normative, then they write off nearly everything else I have to say as well. Right. Which can be an issue.
Well, it's a huge issue. And so I think the key with social media is to seek to be not conciliatory in terms of walking back your positions or watering down your beliefs, but using social media in a conciliatory way in terms of finding the common ground and trying to unite people insofar as you use it. I mean, the reality is most people don't know how to have discussion or dialogue or debate in person. They certainly don't know how to do it behind a computer screen.
Oh, absolutely not.
So, I think what you and I were talking, I think last week about, I don't think it was on air, but how St. Thomas says, don't argue with vegetables.
Yeah.
In other words, don't argue with people that simply don't want to hear the truth. They just want to hear their own mindset confirmed. And so I think part of debating and part of standing for the truth, whether it's in social media or in our regular daily relationships in person, is to be discerning of who's willing to actually dialogue and who's not, who's just there to fight, and don't waste your breath on those who don't care. So I think that's important to keep in mind, too, when we're talking about social media.
That was one thing that happened at that apologetics conference a couple weeks ago with Dr. Sullivan, is Dr. Sullivan had given a presentation on the resurrection of Christ
Yeah.
and why we can believe that it's true. And somebody in the crowd had asked the question of, what if Jesus was an alien and that he came and died, but there was some sort of nanotechnology that brought him back to life or some such thing, and then Dr. Sullivan said, there's some ideas that aren't worth refuting, don't waste your time. And I'm like, that's great. I mean, he doesn't get into it on Facebook, he doesn't get into it on social media. If he's going to address an argument, he wants to address an argument that actually has substantial merit, as opposed to something that's completely ad hoc.
Right.
And doesn't relate to the facts at hand. In fact, I had a conversation with a student just the other day when we were talking about the reliability of the New Testament.
Yeah.
And she kept on bringing up things like, well, what if this? Well, what if that? What if the reason why Paul converted was because he felt guilty? And was like, where's your evidence for that? What is that explaining? How does that explain more facts than a genuine conversion based off of a vision or something along those lines, or a revelation?
Well, and conversion can happen from people feeling guilty.
Sure, absolutely.
What's wrong with that?
But where does it say that in Scripture? In fact, if you look at Acts 9, after the martyrdom of Stephen, it says that Paul was still breathing threats against the Christians, and so he was still just as motivated to persecute them as he was before.
Yeah.
And so I think one thing you're right is that if we do enter in discussions online, particularly with contentious or difficult issues, we want to make sure that we're engaging with people who have have some sort of appearance of being rational at the very least, or open-minded.
Yeah.
And I've seen the fruits. I've seen the problems that come along when you do enter into discussion with somebody who's simply digging their heels in and arguing for the sake of arguing.
Right. I think this relates back in the day when I was, a vivacious young man dating people or looking for relationships. I'm 28 now, so I'm, getting way up there.
Yep.
And I've been married and have a baby on the way.
9 toes in the grave and 1 foot of banana peel, as my brother says.
I have no idea what you just said or what it means.
You're almost dead, basically.
Well, that makes sense.
You're dead.
But when I was dating, when I was, discerning my vocation and all of that kind of thing, there was I don't remember if I came up with this or I came across it in a talk or a book or something, but it could have been when I was counseling kids in my last job as a youth minister, because high schoolers, are not the brightest when it comes to dating. I don't know if you would agree or disagree, John.
I would 100% agree.
There's a select few that date well.
Yeah, and my general rule is you should wait until at least you can drive, because my opinion is that if you're going to date, you might as well not look like an idiot doing it, because could you imagine going up to a girl and being like, hey baby, you're 15 years old, and I might have my permit in a month, let's go to the movies where my mom can drive us in a minivan. You have to sit in back, though, because my mom doesn't want us sitting next to each other for too long without supervision. And my mom, and she's going to be there, too, because we can't get into the movie without parental permission.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you're going to look like a dork, I mean, if you're going to be stupid, at least get to the point where you don't have to invite your mom along.
Well, but that flies in the face of what dating originally was, as courtship, where it was surrounded by the family. It was centered on the family, not centered on getting in a car and driving away from the family.
Sure.
Anyway,
I'm teasing anyway.
No, I know.
It's a joke.
The advice that came into my life one way or another, I don't know how, and it doesn't really matter at this point. But every decision you make in a relationship, at the end of it, whether you end up with the person or not, that person should be a better person for having dated you than they would have been otherwise.
Sure.
And so every decision that you make should be oriented towards that end of being or helping that person be a better person. And I think similar advice can be applied to our interactions on social media. Whether or not other people take us up on the wisdom we have to offer, because you can only lead a horse to water, you can't make him drink.
Right.
You could shove his head underwater, but that's probably not going to end well for you. But you can't make a horse drink water. The wisdom we offer or the interactions we engage in should always be oriented towards making the other person better, not simply making ourselves be right. We should have a desire and great penchant for the truth. But that truth can't be divorced from charity. And so sometimes in charity it means that we walk away from a debate because the more and more we push and push and push, the harder that person's heart becomes.
Sure.
Well, maybe the harder heart is good because it can shatter more efficiently. I don't know. Only God knows those things. But even in our Easter vigil at my parish, it was great this past Easter. We did all 7 Old Testament readings. It was glorious. I loved it. Yep. It was the first time I was at an Easter vigil that used all 7. Okay. I remember being at your baptism, John. You were baptized, right?
Yeah, I had the liturgical home run.
Yeah. I remember being at yours. We didn't do all 7 readings. We did 4 of the Old Testament, the Epistle, and the Gospel. I think most parishes, at least around here in Minnesota, only do 4 Old Testament readings. But we did all 7 on Easter Vigil. It was glorious. And, of course, one of those readings is from, I think it's the prophet Ezekiel, where God says, I will remove from you your stony hearts and give you natural ones. Or I think another translation is hearts of flesh. Yep. But sometimes we need our hearts hardened to such a degree that they can actually shatter, be brittle. It's kind of like, tempered glass. It's super strong in almost every way, but if a tiny little point hits the glass in just the right way, the whole thing shatters. And so sometimes we just need that little last...
and once we realize our own brokenness, we can offer up to the Lord. And it's kind of like with Pharaoh in Egypt. Right. God continually offered him a way out, and then showed him a sign of his power, and offered him basically a deal, let my people go, or this is going to happen, etc. And it's go worship, just to make sure everybody knows that it wasn't a political freedom necessarily that they're talking about, but a religious freedom. Yeah. And it got to the point where every time God acted, Pharaoh hardened his heart. The Bible does say that God hardened his heart, but it's kind of like the sun hardening clay or melting wax.
Yes, but it's important to note that Pharaoh began the process.
Yep.
He hardened his own heart first, and by doing so, kind of allowed God to show Pharaoh the necessary end of that process.
Right, which is exactly where I was going too. Is if you put clay out in the sun, it's going to get hard. If you put a candle in the sun, it's going to melt. Yeah. And so the same thing comes to 2 different kinds of things. And when Pharaoh initially hardened his heart, he showed what kind of thing that he wanted to be. And so God continued to help that process unfold, and the hope was, I think, redemption of Pharaoh, right? Ultimately, and also the redemption of the people. But you talk about a hardened heart, and you talk about a heart of flesh, and it's in baptism, it's in the new covenant that we get that new heart of flesh. And I think that one of the beautiful parts that's come out of this tragedy is the family of this man that you're talking about.
Oh, yeah, I was actually just thinking about a bridge, what we're talking about now, back to the story, and I thought of a good one, talking about the hardness of heart of Steve Stevens and the softness of heart of the family of Mr. Goodwin. And I think it's important that we honor the life of the man, Robert Goodwin Sr., who was 74 years old when he died just the other day. But if you look into this story at all, Anderson Cooper of CNN interviewed the family, and I think this is where you were going with that. And Anderson Cooper he said, I wasn't going to ask you, but since you brought this person up, I'm not going to use this person's name in front of you. Essentially, out of respect, he wasn't going to talk about Steve Stevens. But what do you want this person to know? And the family, Debbie Goodwin, responds and says, I would say turn yourself in. That would be number one. Because although I do believe in forgiveness, I do believe in the law. Meaning when you break the law, there's a penalty for breaking the law. And this man broke the law by taking my father's life. And so although I forgive him, there's still a penalty that he must pay for what he did to my dad. And so I would want him to turn himself in. And you know what? I believe that God would give me the grace to even embrace this man and hug him. Without anything I truly do, she continued. It's just the way my heart is. It's the right thing to do. And so I just would want him to know that even in his worst state, he's loved, by God, that God loves him, even in the bad stuff that he did to my dad, that he's still loved, and that he has some worth. Well, even though he's going to have to go through many things to get better, there is worth in him. And as long as there's life in him, there is hope for him too. Goodwin concluded, I do believe that. And she went on to talk about how one of the best things her dad did was to instill this faith in her, in God himself. And I think this is one of the most beautiful ways of using social media. Is not simply about preachy and gospel and that kind of thing. That's good too, depending on how we do it. But to show compassion, to show love, to show unity and forgiveness, and to use social media as a platform for showing humanity at its best, not simply to show humanity at its worst.
Well, what's interesting here is that this is a supernatural charity. And so it's showing humanity not just at its best, but what it can be when God's grace elevates it and redeems it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because by nature, we would want to seek revenge. We would want to seek some sort of retribution against this man for its own sake. Because we have a proclivity to sin, a proclivity to look at somebody who does these things and think that they are just worthless individuals who now deserve death and deserve everything they're going to get. And she said that, yes, there's an order of justice that needs to be upheld because you did break the law.
Right.
And it was against the social good, and it was against the individual good of my dad and the family and yourself. But she recognizes that above that, there is an element of charity, an element of goodness still within him, an optimism for repentance, an optimism for this person to become everything God wants him to be. And in fact, God can right straight with the broken lines of this man's life and create out of it a beautiful message for others.
Yeah, and this is so Catholic social justice at its most brilliant form, in that, yes, forgiveness needs to happen, but that does not negate the necessity of justice.
Right.
Forgiveness can only... Well, not only, but forgiveness goes hand in hand with justice. I mean, God forgave his people, Israel, but there's still a justice that needed to happen, and so therein lies the spilling of blood, which was originally done through animal sacrifice, and Christ the Lamb becomes the perfect offering for the remission of sins. So even though there's forgiveness, there still needs to be an element of justice to give what is due to the one who's been wronged. So I don't know if you have anything else to add.
Yeah, I mean, for some reason the name is escaping me, but the girl who's 12 or 13 years old got stabbed.
Maria Goretti?
Yeah, Maria Goretti. I don't know it's so easy. It's
Saint Maria Goretti.
Saint Maria Goretti, and she's a great example of this same idea, is that there was a boy who was lusting after her, and
he was Alessandro Serenelli.
Yeah, Alessandro, yeah.
Older man. I mean.
Oh, I thought he was a teen.
No,
I thought he was an older teen.
Maria Goretti was, like you said, 13, and Alessandro. Well, I say older man. He was significantly older than she was. Sure. I think at the time he was either in his late teens or early 20s.
Right.
And he was a neighbor, a trusted neighbor. And Alessandro, I've actually used his conversion story in some of my youth group stuff because he's got an amazing story too after the fact. But carry on. Well,
anyway, what was incredible about that story is while she was being murdered, she would say things like, "Alessandro, this is not good for you. This is a mortal sin. Stop." And so she was so unconcerned about her own welfare. I mean, of course, she didn't want to die. She didn't want to be violated. But her first thought was even beyond that, about the evil that Alessandro was doing to his own soul. It's kind of like what Socrates said in I think it's the Apology, maybe the Credo. I'm sorry, but he says that no evil can suffer a man so bad that's as bad as the evil that he commits. And I think that there is an element of that in the story of Maria Goretti and Alessandro, because even after he attacked her, and while he was in jail, she still offered up forgiveness, and that was one of the first things that she wanted to make sure.
I vaguely recall that, so she didn't die on the scene. No. She was brought to the hospital and operated on with no anesthesia, which would just be an awful operation. And they tried to close some stab wounds by some pretty horrific means to try and save her life. And if I remember correctly, during that whole ordeal, she was praying for Alessandro and suffering for his sake. Very beautiful. Another great example of this same mentality of Ms. Goodwin, Debbie Goodwin, is John Paul II himself, who was shot by Aliaka back in the 80s. And John Paul went to his jail cell, forgave him personally, and then heard his confession. How beautiful!
Oh, incredible! Yeah.
Every time I see that picture of John Paul hearing Mr. Aka's confession, is just heartrending. It's beautiful, and that was made more so actually 2 years ago. I was able to see the gun that was used to shoot John Paul.
Wow.
Yeah, I have a picture of it. It's pretty amazing. It's actually in John Paul II's childhood home that I got to walk through, and I took some pictures of it, which I wasn't supposed to do, but I have pictures of it. So there's that.
Admitting to that on air now.
I am.
Talk about incriminating yourself.
Yeah, well, I don't know if there's an extradition deal between us and Italy, but I'm not too worried about it. I don't think they're going to come after me for that.
I don't think so, especially being Italian yourself. They wouldn't.
Yeah, also they didn't take my camera when they came in and yelled at me, so I'm not too worried about it.
Oh, there we go. We're fine. But anyway, I think that the example of the family here of the Goodwins shows, as we were saying, the good use of social media, because I know that this itself is also going to go viral besides the Facebook Live killer. They're going to be showing this other side as well, where the people want to offer forgiveness, and that's going to be something that permeates through all of through our culture. It becomes a social meme. Now, I don't mean necessarily in the same way that we talk about often when we speak of the interwebs, but it'll become a meme in the sense that it's something that permeates the culture, and that's where Inter Mirifica starts off about how speaking about how social media or social communication is of the utmost importance for the new evangelization, because it has this ability not only to reach individuals but the masses and the whole of human society, and that is the social media communication. That's what the purpose of it is to help influence all of society. And when we have the terms of our conversations dictated by people who are not supportive of the truth, or people who aren't really pushing for a furtherance of the gospel, then what happens is the cultural consciousness starts drifting in that direction. And so I think that Inter Mirifica is very prophetic in its teaching and its drive for us to, as Catholics, get engaged in social media as much as we can.
Yeah, and you just said prophetic. I think that's, in some ways, one of the greatest understatements possible. And not that you can even say that it's somehow more prophetic than prophetic, because prophecy is prophecy.
Sure.
But this, honestly, Inter Mirifica is one of these little-known documents of the Church, even of Vatican II. Because when we hear Vatican II, if we have any knowledge of it, we think of Gaudium et Spes or Lumen Gentium or maybe Sacrosanctum Concilium, and even less so De Verbum. Inter Mirifica is the shortest of the documents, I believe.
Right.
And it was one of the earliest that was promulgated, December 4th, 1963. So we just celebrated its 50th anniversary not long ago. I actually celebrated it myself. I made a point to celebrate that anniversary because it's so amazing. But just the first couple articles here in the decree, if you want to read it at home, it's only 5 pages long. It's very, very accessible. It does not use a bunch of theological fancy pants language. Super accessible. But it talks about the importance of wonderful technological discoveries, which men of talent, especially in the present era, have made with God's help. And it says the most important of these inventions are those media which can reach and influence not only individuals but the masses. So mass media, mass communication, social communication, it says specifically, which I love that it uses social communication, because we didn't have really social media in the 60s. I mean, there's
Right.
TV and radio, but even that was pretty limited. And so when it talks about social communication, I'm thinking, my goodness, the church just understands man better than man can.
Right.
It's amazing. And it goes on to say that the church recognizes that this media, if properly utilized, can be of great service to mankind, such as Debbie Goodwin. She's properly utilizing television and radio and the internet in order to, it says greatly, the document says that it can greatly contribute to men's entertainment and instruction, as well as to the spread and support of the kingdom of God. And I can't think of a better way to do that in the situation of a heinous murder of your father
Right.
than to show the love and mercy of God. I mean, how beautiful.
Right. Because, I mean, we all struggle with brokenness, and then I think that through her example, even if Steve Stevenson doesn't himself convert and his own heart isn't softened and turned into a heart of flesh, I think that somebody watching this who might think that, oh, God can't forgive me for X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
They see this and this message of this beautiful woman who is offering this incredible, heartfelt plea for a person to turn to God, who even says that I will hug my father's murderer.
Yeah.
And I realize
Yeah.
ourselves that, if God can change somebody so profoundly that they are willing to offer an embrace to the person who murdered their father in blood, then what is it about my sin that can prevent God from forgiving me and transforming me into somebody who can love that way? And that's something that I want to strive for myself.
Yeah.
Because I have a hard time forgiving people who make me mad at work. I mean...
Sorry, John.
I know, Jake. I'll forgive you someday. But you have a lot of repentance to do.
Yeah, I know. It reminds me of when The Passion of the Christ came out. And this is another great use of social media. Yep. Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ. There were people who committed murders that found a way to murder without ever getting caught. And they turned themselves in immediately after the end of the movie.
Wow.
I mean, how incredible. I mean, that's the amazing use.
I had heard about that. And that's... Sorry, man.
No, I was just going to say that with a thing like Mr. Stevens here, the church wants justice to happen, but also wants mercy to happen. And there's a line in the second article of the document that I think really expresses the truth of the church, because the church is seen as sometimes in society as something domineering or something that's just about strict justice and rules. But it says, indeed, the church experiences maternal grief at the harm all too often done to society by the evil use of media. And I think that's just such a beautiful expression of what the church is and who the church is, our mother. And mothers don't simply want to execute justice. They experience grief, and oftentimes a greater grief than the culprit experiences. So I just think that that's a beautiful line in which to highlight.
Well, I think so, too. And one of the things I really wanted to look at here, too, is you mentioned before about how the document itself is very short. And one thing that I've also found in it is that there's a lot of these little pithy statements, something that you can hook on to, like you were just talking about, this maternal grief that the mother church has over the misuse of social media and other forms of communication. And we see this in the way that we need to actually engage the culture. One thing that the other side, or I don't know, the new atheists are really good at this, and the people who follow after their style, is they've done a very good job of creating a soundbite culture where everything can be summed up in 164 characters on Twitter. And they make this one statement that it's powerful, it seems clever,
but devoid of meaning.
It's devoid of meaning, but it seems like it has a particular penetration into a truth that is that has an effect on the way people think about things. One thing that I've seen over and over again, especially as Easter's been coming up, as Easter has gone by now, is...
Easter hasn't gone by. We're in the octave.
Oh, you're right.
It's 8 days of Easter.
Well, I mean, the Easter Sunday celebration, of course, Jacob. But there has been a meme that has been circling around on the internet for years. And in fact, I was really drawn into this line of thinking for a while, too. But it's a picture of the pagan goddess Ishtar and saying that we in English, or we celebrate Easter because we, as a Western Christian civilization, have borrowed it from this pagan goddess of fertility, and that the word Ishtar, Easter comes from the word Ishtar, and then do you really think Easter bunnies and eggs have anything to do with the resurrection, and et cetera, and it draws all these different parallels, and it's put with a picture and a 5 or 6 sentence paragraph, and it's supposed to completely dismantle the Christian celebration of Easter. Which is absolutely absurd. None of those things are true. Number one, right. In Spanish, the word for Easter is Pascha.
Right.
In almost every other Latinate language, it's some derivation of the word Pascha, which is Passover.
Right.
And that's the celebration we have. It's only in English that we have, English and German, that we have this derivation of calling it Easter Oster.
Right.
And what that comes from is the etymology of the language and the development, where when Germany was being converted to Christianity, the springtime festival that was celebrated was Passover, was the resurrection, and because in German, they called it the springtime festival, so like they called Oster, which then just kind of eventually turned into just calling the festival itself Easter. It's kind of like how we call the Independence Day the 4th of July.
Sure.
So
Halloween from All Hallows Eve.
And so there's just this cultural evolution of the language. And so there's this huge explanation behind it, and even the bunny and the eggs have something that's like accidentally connected to Easter with like Lent.
Yeah.
In the Middle Ages, they would abstain from animal products altogether, like even including eggs, and so there was a practice of hard boiling eggs, and to help preserve them for a little bit longer. So, but there's this whole truth behind the celebrations culturally with Easter, and also the word itself. But what the new atheists have done, or this anti-holiday crowd have done, is they've tried to discredit it, and they've done a very good job of just making this really fast and rash claim in a really, really truncated and brief way.
Yeah.
That seems like it's this great revelation, but in reality, it's just it's bunk. There's no evidence for it whatsoever.
Well, I think the other effect of the meme culture, the quick hitting, as Rush Limbaugh calls it, the drive-by media, as all of these fast, meaningless phrases come by, is even if we don't believe in what's being said, it alters how we think in terms of being able to then pick up even a 5-page document and read something of any kind of depth. And so I think the other side of it isn't just the message, but the way it's being broadcast changes the way we're thinking, and we can no longer sit down and dive into something that has even the most moderate amount of depth to it. So, again, that's in part why we're doing our radio show.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that the other issue here, too, is, again, it makes it so that if Jesus says something, I always forget the line, but I quote it all the time, so I should just memorize it. But he says something along the lines of the sons of this world are more apt, or more shrewd than the sons of the light.
Yeah.
And basically what that means is that when it comes to broadcasting or making their point, people who are not supportive of the gospel or act contrary to it are better at conveying the message. And I think that there's a huge amount of truth to that.
Oh, absolutely.
Again, with the new atheists, I mean, if you look at their arguments themselves, they're garbage.
Well, it's because you're not conveying any truth,
yeah.
And so you can just throw a few words together and it's done. For us, we have thousands of years of truth to convey, and the church is an expert, like you were saying. There's these great little lines in Inter Mirifica that you can cling on to, and you can just kind of ruminate on and allow it to just penetrate your heart and your mind. But for the most part, the truths of the faith take more than just one line to explain.
Right.
And so it's not even a question of us being able to be shrewd, but rather understanding the principles so deeply within ourselves that we can enter into conversation with people. And I think that's part of the reality of truth, is that it is relational, and we have to have a conversation. We can't simply be Christians evangelizing by way of memes, by way of Twitter, by way of Facebook, because there's nothing relational about it.
Sure.
Therefore, it flies in the face of everything that Christ wanted his church to be. Because the church is a reflection of the Trinity, which is perfect relationship. We can't divorce ourselves from relationship and expect to evangelize, expect to transform the culture like the new atheists are doing. Because they're not conveying any kind of truth. They're just conveying nonsense in some words that sound good.
Right, and that's what I've noticed about objections in general to the faith, is that it's very easy to just say, well, what about X? And then you have to enter this long explanation to actually diffuse the objection, not because the objection has any merit in itself, like I was talking about before, about the girl who said that Paul converted out of guilt rather than genuine encounter with Christ or some such thing.
Yeah.
I have to go into talking about here's what the Scripture says, here's what we can come from that, here's what it means to make an explanation ad hoc, in order for her to understand that her objection doesn't have any merit.
Right.
Because so often what I've seen is that people will make an objection, and because they make the objection, they think it actually diffuses or defeats the question at hand.
Right, they don't expect an answer back.
Yeah, they don't expect an answer back. But I think that there is still an element of necessity for us to engage in the way that people are thinking, which is unfortunately shallow, and very often very shallow, and is contained in sound bites. But this is where people like C.S. Lewis or G.K. Chesterton can give us an excellent example of how to be both profound and
very concise.
Very concise.
Yeah.
There you go. Again, pithy is the word I'm really looking for here. And the thing with Chesterton and C.S. Lewis is they have these little sound bites that they can offer, where Lewis says that if I believe in Christianity like I believe in the sun, not because I see it, but by it I see everything else.
Yeah.
I mean, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
It also has an element of invitation.
Right.
Which is that relational aspect that you're talking about, where it invites us into thinking, wait, what does he mean by that? That by it I see everything else.
Yeah.
And what it means is that his Christianity, his faith, helps him, not only because he sees the direct evidence for it to be as true, but rather by using Christianity as a lens, he can see the world for what it really is, and it makes more sense to him than to deny the truth of the Christian faith. Because if he were to deny Christianity to be true, he'd be letting go of the explanation of why reality is the way it is.
Right.
And I think that there's something that we can strive for in creating these sound bites that are not only something that's catchy, that's something that's beautiful, that's something that sticks in your mind that you can ruminate on, or as Greg Kokel puts it, a stone in your shoe to annoy you all day if you're not somebody who's going to ruminate on something for a while. But it's also something that invites us into a conversation to go more deeply into the examining the truth of the world.
Yeah. I want to take just a minute here. We only have a few minutes left, but Article 4 of Inter Mirifica, I think, is perhaps one of the most prophetic things the Church has uttered in the last 60 years, other than Pope Paul VI's Humana Vitae. But in the fourth article, it says that for the proper use of social media, it's necessary that those who use it be acquainted with the norms of morality and conscientiously put them into practice. I mean, how often is this? That people who use social media both know morality and choose to use morality.
Right.
I mean, this is like insane in our world today, because everybody says, well, your morality is your morality, and mine is mine, and your truth is your truth, and my truth is my truth, and then it's all this relativistic garbage. But to be acquainted with the norms of morality and then put them into use, to choose to use them, I think is absolutely incredible. And it says you must look then to the nature of what is communicated. And this goes to what we were saying, is that the nature of what is communicated with Christianity is a message of great truth and depth and wisdom and beauty and love. And the nature of what's communicated by the new atheist is hollow and empty, and there's nothing there. And so, again, that even goes further back to when we were talking about St. Thomas and saying, don't argue with vegetables. Sometimes we need to show people the hollowness of their argumentation, but other people are just not willing to hear it. They just want to be hollow. But I think the next line is very important for us all, and this is what you were saying just a second ago, John, is that we need to communicate by way of how the culture is communicating. We have to enter into that and inject the truth of the faith. And it says, at the same time, those who use social media, must take into consideration the entire situation or circumstances, namely the person's place, time, and other conditions under which communication takes place, and which can affect or totally change its propriety. We can't just say the truth of Christianity and say, well, if you guys want to listen, you can listen, and if not, I'll walk away. We can't be kind of a hands-off apologist.
Right.
When we use social media, we have to use it with the moral norms. We have to conscientiously practice morality in the use of the media, but not be afraid to enter into the daily lives of those non-believers that we encounter every single day, whether it's on the street or by way of social media. We have to be willing to engage them in the norms that they're used to, but without negating the norms by which we are called to live as Christians.
Sure. Well, and I think this also goes down to that scholastic principle of that which is received according to the mode of the receiver, which you and I talk about that quite a bit. And what I mean by that is, if our culture has become one which needs to be engaged in a particular way through social media, which it means that it needs to be aesthetically pleasing for one. It needs to have a level of entertainment, as it talks about in paragraph 2 of Mirifica, but it also needs to be brief enough for them to kind of get the idea right away and move on. I think that is something that we really need to strive for. For the most part, unfortunately, I think most Catholic movies have largely been garbage in terms of how they're put together. I mean, honestly, one of the worst movies I've seen in my entire life.
No, let's not go there.
Was
one of the best ones is The Passion, and Restless Heart, I thought, was very good.
Those are two good examples.
Let's be positive here.
All right, we'll be positive. There's been a few really bad movies out there, but there's really great examples, and I think that Christian movies are getting better.
Yeah.
I haven't seen it yet, but Pace for Christ by Lee Strobel.
Oh, okay.
It's a decent book in itself. It was actually what turned me on to Christian apologetics when I was in high school.
Yeah.
But the movie, from everyone I've heard about it from, even Richard Carrier gave it very good reviews in terms of its cinematography. And Richard Carrier is a skeptic of Christ's existence. And has some really ad hoc and bizarre arguments for it, but don't worry about that for now. But he's somebody who's opposed to the faith in many ways. He even offered a good review of it. But in terms of social media, and Restless Heart was also very good.
Yeah, it was.
Augustine movie. I have it. I really want to watch it again. But in terms of social media, there's a few efforts, apostolic efforts that have been undertaken by one local guy here, Father Mike Schmitz, called Ascension Presents, where he offers a reflection.
Ascension Press.
Ascension Press. Oh, yeah. But the program's called Ascension Press.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, so it's the Ascension Press YouTube channel. This is Ascension Presents. But he goes into all sorts of topics, and he offers commentary on daily life or on what's in the news, and he does it in a very good way.
There's another good priest, Father Sam Medley. He's from the Archdiocese of St. Paul, Minneapolis. He grew up here, but he's a priest for the Society of Our Lady of the Most Holy Trinity, SOLT, S-O-L-T.
Yeah.
and on YouTube he's got his medley minutes, and they're just 1 minute little blurbs about things in the news media and just Catholicism in general. Fantastic approach to the faith. So if you're looking for a little 1 minute pick-me-up, Medley Minutes, MEDLEY, Medley Minutes on YouTube. I haven't looked at it in a while. I'm assuming he's still doing them, but if not, there's a number of them on YouTube still. One last thing I want to point out in Mirifica, and then I think we need more time on air, but I don't know. We're running out of time quickly on all our topics. But the last line I want to look at on Intramirifica, John, and then you can wrap us up here perhaps. But it says, among these circumstances to be considered is the precise manner in which a given medium achieves its effect. For its influence can be so great that men, especially if they are unprepared, can scarcely become aware of it, govern its impact, or if necessary, reject it. And I think that's really important to understand that just because media is there, we need to understand that we can reject it, and we need to, but because it's so broad, sometimes we feel like we're the small fish, we're the odd ones because we disagree with it. All this other crap is the norm, therefore so there must be something wrong with me.
Sure.
And oftentimes it's the exact opposite. Most people are offended by certain things in the media and do reject it, but because media is isolating, we don't have the numbers in mind to be able to reject. And I think this is especially true with younger people because they don't have the well-grounded, well-formed relationships by which to bounce off their ideas of good and evil and that kind of thing. And so they're subjected to this media. So parents out there, just be very aware of the media coming into your household because that is very much affecting your house and your children, but everybody in the household as well. So that's the last point I wanted to point out within Intermirifica, at least for today.
Sure, and I mean, I've got a lot to say on this too. I mean, this was an incredible document, and I think that one of the things that C.S. Lewis talks about mere Christianity, which is also mentioned here in, I think, paragraph 14, I'm not going to quote it, is that to go more towards C.S. Lewis to know him better, we often will ask as the faithful, when is the church going to do X? When is it the church going to evangelize the culture and teach the faith more properly and everything? But the one thing that we forget about is that we are also the church.
Right.
And so while it's the case that bishops and priests have a role to play in overseeing, which the word bishop means overseer, overseeing the ministries of lay people, I think that it's important for us to take our own skills and talents and offer those up to the Lord. If you are a graphic designer, if you are somebody who is skilled with videography and cinematography or whatever, use that skill and give it to Christ and see where you can apply that to the needs of the church. And the reason why I say that is if we don't do that, then what happens is clergy think that it's necessarily their task to take those things up. And then sometimes what will happen is they'll offer not a high-quality product.
Right.
What I was talking about before is that one of the worst movies I've ever seen, I wasn't going to name it, but rather I was going to say it was a Catholic movie and it was produced by somebody who had the best intentions, but it just didn't go very well.
Right.
And it's because I don't think they really delegated the task correctly. And so one thing that I want to make sure that we do as Catholics is offer up a media that is expressive of the truth, and that it really draws attention to goodness and beauty, but that it can also, when we do that, it can also get a little preachy. So I think also it's important for us to point out the brokenness in humanity and the pain that can come through following that brokenness. Mm-hmm. And it's also very important for us to reach across the aisle, both to Protestants and non-Catholics, because otherwise if we simply preach to people who want to hear a particular message or our own message, we'll get stuck in an echo chamber and we'll only be evangelizing ourselves.
Right.
And so it needs to be something that has a mass appeal rather than just an appeal to faithful Catholics.
Yeah. Well, that's going to have to wrap it up for today. I know last week we talking about more of those life issues, which I'm sure those listening today were hoping we were going to get to. The reason why we delayed that from the beginning of our show today is because we're hoping to have Dr. Elizabeth Rex on next week, who's a Catholic bioethicist, professor at Holy Apostles College and Seminary, and does a great number of other works for the church and for humanity in general. She's a great expert on these things, and so we thought we would wait and try and get her on air so that we can talk about these things even more in depth. So our hope is that next week we can have Dr. Elizabeth Rex on and go from there. For the Lost Voice program, this is Jacob Nelson signing off with John Studi. Have a blessed Easter week, and he is risen.
Hallelujah.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.